Okay, so anyways, we got them playing the Diablo 4 beta for the first time. There's a lot of good, there's a lot of bad, right? So we're just gonna jump right into it. I'm just gonna tell you guys what I think. We're just gonna go top to bottom and tell you guys about my experience. So, overall, character customization, you just enter the game, you go to your character customization menus. There's a lot more depth than, let's say, like Diablo 2 or Diablo 3. You don't have like gender locking, which is cool. You have a lot of different options and selectors. You can customize hair, you can customize like tattoos, jewelry. You have a couple like facial presets. Overall, for an ARPG, there's a lot more customization options than other games. So it did get modernized in that aspect. However, I kind of wish there was more. I wish you could like customize individual aspects of your facial features, like, you know, your eyes, your nose, your mouth, stuff like that, maybe even body type. But honestly, it's a lot better than pretty much every other ARPG that I play, which is, you know, Diablo 2, Diablo 3, Path of Exile. So overall, happy with customization. And then in terms of like costumes and MTX that we got utilized in the wardrobe this weekend, the free stuff looks really good. The art team did a wonderful job and making your base items that drop on the ground look good. And that's gonna be one of the end monetizations for Diablo 4 is additional MTX that they said will come from battle passes, that'll come from maybe like a shop. So you don't actually have to pay money to look good. Kind of like other games, right? Other games, when you start up your character, you kind of just look like you got a bucket on your head. And right, you're just running around, it's like mix and match, and it looks like you picked up random stuff off the ground, and your character doesn't look good unless you're spending money. But yeah, just the base MTX costumes wardrobe system is pretty good, and they have like presets and loadouts. So overall, I was generally happy with that, and pretty good improvement over like Diablo 3 stuff. And then overall, when we actually jumped into the game and we started playing, graphically wise, I was actually pretty impressed with we're talking about graphics itself, not like UI or UX elements. They just went back more to Diablo 2, right? It was dark, it was gritty, it was gory. The game looked pretty good in most regards. I would actually go and say it looks best in genre right now. I don't think they're the better looking ARPG on the market. Path of Exile 2 might prove otherwise, but you know, that's not out yet. But overall, graphics really good. Pretty impressed with it. One of my critiques though, the shadows, like, this is a minor thing. The shadows kind of just always are like locked behind your character. Maybe like have better dynamic shadows or something. But overall, the graphics, they knocked it out of the park, and that's usually every Blizzard game. Every Blizzard game looks good. In addition to that, when you're playing through the game, the cinematics, I don't want to like say any spoilers or anything. Blizzard cinematic team, it's like watching a top tier movie. The voice acting, like everything that goes into making like the cinematic immersive. It was fun. I did a full playthrough watching all the cinematics, and I loved some of the characters. The Bloodied Wolf was probably like one of my favorite NPCs, just the setting of it. And his voice line was really good. But the game, it could improve a little bit graphically wise, a little more detail, but overall, really good graphics, right? Now going into like your difficulty selectors, we only had 2 available. There's kind of like world tiers. I guess it's kind of like Diablo 3 scaling difficulty, right? It just makes the mobs a little harder. It gives you a little more XP and loot. Overall, leveling wise, like on veteran difficulty, veteran really didn't feel too difficult at all. I didn't have any leveling deaths. I feel like maybe for the difficulty selectors, they can maybe either add like another option. So instead of just having adventurer and veteran for the initial difficulty, add another option for people that want to be really challenged and really punished. Or maybe slightly bump up veteran difficulty. But that also leads into early class balance. There is definitely a huge disparity in early class balance, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. But yeah, veteran difficulty, it didn't feel like overly challenging if you play ARPGs. Now we're gonna go into UI, UX interface stuff like key bindings. The UI, UX, it's, okay, so the thing about UI and UX, it is one of those things that I don't really worry about too much because it's a thing that's easily fixable. But overall, the UI, UX, your entire like interface and stuff like that, it just really didn't look the best. It was like kind of like blown out. It was blocky. People called it mobily. They call it, you know, they're saying it looked like Diablo Immortal. So I definitely think they could clean up, they could simplify it, they could darken elements, they could make some things more visible, they can make some things portrayed in a better manner, and particularly the quest tracking. Quest tracking, you know, you could select a waypoint, you know, point on the map, and it'll like lead you there. But when you're actually tracking quests, you can only select like one major quest and one blue quest. I wish that you could track more quests at one time. Also on the minimap, I think they need a better representation, like where different events are, or have an event lists, because what ends up happening, a lot of your playtime in Diablo 4 is in instance dungeons. And then you end up missing out on random spawn world events because there's not a good notification for when things are going on. So I think they need to find a way to better portray information of in-game activities when you're playing the game, because they actually want you to be in that overworld and interacting with it. They just need a way to better show you where things are and what things are going on. So yeah, the quest tracking needs a pretty big overhaul. Same thing with like friends list. The social systems in the game, huge improvement over Diablo 3 for your clan customization, the way invites are handled. One of the weird thing about invites is a little nitpicky. When someone applies to your guild and you accept them, they have to accept the invitation. Why not just automatically accept it? I would also see, since what they're doing with Diablo 4, it's not like a true ARPG, it's an ARPG MMO, and there's like really, really large communities like throughout the system. They need to have a larger guild capacity. The guild capacity is only 150. So I think they need to improve on different guild systems and some of the social systems. Whispering people, inspecting people's kind of weird. You just have to get used to that little mouse center control wheel thing, and then you could do like your assignments there. And I think that's pretty much because it's also made for console. Okay, so that's the basic interface UI stuff. So now we're going to go to the little key bindings, controller ultimates. So when we're playing Diablo 4, not only did I play on keyboard and mouse, which you normally play ARPGs on, right? They're originally PC-oriented games, but a lot of companies are making them also for consoles nowadays, right? Because it's going to cover all demographics, more profitable that way. But anyways, I played controller. Controller on PC actually feels really, really good. What they did, like, so your movement obviously had like force move built into it. It had like auto aim, auto targeting, the loot pickup works, all the controls are active. Like when you hit your inputs, they register right away. You actually have like additional functionality by hitting your joysticks, and you have like options to see more stuff. But overall, actually, the controller experience was really, really good. It was nice and fluid. It wasn't stiff or anything. It was really, really nice. However, I did have some issues on mouse and keyboard. I don't know if this was related to server-related stuff or some other issues, but sometimes on mouse and keyboard, you'd be hitting your inputs after hitting other skills, and it would not register your input. So you would end up having to hit that input multiple times. And that was kind of frustrating. I did not experience that on controller when I was testing across all characters, so I don't know if it was server related or if there's some other contributing factor to causing that. In addition to key binding on PC, there is no really good way to bind force move to mouse scroll wheel, which a lot of like Diablo 3 players really like. So I would definitely like them to look into that and broaden your key bindings for your force move. Or another potential thing is I would actually prefer them to give us just force move on our left click. So don't have a skill on it, have force move bound to left click, have that element off your screen somewhere. And then also another thing about ultimates in this game, I feel like ultimates are almost mandatory, right? They're suggested. Have ultimates as a separate key binding also. So basically have force move as your left click, and then have ultimates as a separate thing. And then you'll have your normal skills that you could utilize in addition to things that are kind of expected within an ARPG. There's only 6 slots. Well, yeah, so what they would end up doing, right, is you would have your force move that it's just always there, right, for your click, and then you can assign it to whoever. That didn't take up a skill slot. And then you would have your ultimate, and then you would have your skills. like 6 or 5 right there. Mouse wheel best for force move. So yeah, ultimates kind of build defining. They took up a slot, so I feel like they should just have their own key binding. Not only would it broaden up builds, it would just feel a lot better. In addition to that, a lot of people care about story and lore. I'm not the biggest story lore Andy myself, but the story and lore in Diablo 4 really stood out to me. The storytelling was really good. Some of the different lines were like corny or whatever. But overall, I was pretty happy with the story. It was captivating. The lore was intriguing. It definitely grasped my intentions or my attention. And I'm kind of looking forward to who the main antagonists and protagonists are going to be and who like might surprise us later on. And then sounds overall, Blizzard sound team, they did an absolutely amazing job. They actually did like that little blog post with how they recorded the different sounds in like real time. But between impact sounds, combat sounds, like mob destruction sounds, just you moving through the campaign area, like all the music and stuff like that, beautifully done. It was immersive. It set a nice ambiance overall for the game. Overall, sounds pretty happy with it. Now, we're going to go into leveling experience. So, leveling experience, early class balance. So, we don't really know much about late game in Diablo 4 yet. There's still an NDA on it. People have played it. We don't know what they've really changed. But overall, there's a huge disparity in the leveling experience in the 3 classes that we got to test this weekend. Wizard and Rogue on every difficulty was mindlessly easy. You could level with different skills. There were skills that were definitely overperforming that will probably receive some form of adjustment, looking at like Hydra, like Twisted Blades, you know, like Flurry, stuff like that. These things were really, really strong early on. But that's kind of how ARPGs are, right? Every single ARPG usually has a set of like leveling skills, leveling things that are stronger, and then you use those early on, and then later on throughout your campaign, and once you reach endgame, you'll end up respecking and utilizing build-defining legendaries and gear to really mold and shape your build. So, without seeing what endgame is, I don't really know what that is. There is definitely a huge disparity in character power while leveling. Sork and Rogue really, really easy, and Barb was a lot more complex. Another thing with Barbarian and just melee characters in general is a lot of the bosses and dungeon things that you encountered, they were very anti-melee with all their mechanics, and sometimes it was really, really frustrating trying to stick to the boss and actually deal damage. You were able to deal damage in a decent manner, but it was a pretty night and day difference between playing Source or whatever you want to call it, Source, and Rogue and Barbarian. I guess we'll go into combat now too. So overall with combat, the combat they're trying to do with Diablo 4, they're trying to implement the dodge function. And I think the best way to describe this is they're trying to create a more live, reactive gameplay loop where when you see a visual animation of an attack, they want you to move out of the way. However, the problem with this is the dodge in the game doesn't have iframes. So a lot of times when you end up trying to dodge, you still get hit. So I don't know if they're going to add iframes to dodge, but I feel like dodge overall should be looked at. It does provide more mobility, and then you have like implicits on legendaries, and it causes your character to have more movement, which is kind of like bread and butter of ARPGs, right? You want to like move through areas and dungeons quickly. However, the dodge definitely needs to be looked at since it doesn't have iframes. However, that could be problematic because I know like one of the main endgame activities is they want to make PvP one of the main endgame activities with their designated PvP zone and the currencies that you get. Basically, combat in Diablo 4, they're just trying to make it more tactical than the previous game by implementing the dodge mechanics. So anyway, I think dodge mechanic needs a little bit of a revision, maybe a little bit of an overview. And now this is actually one of my big criticisms, especially like when playing hardcore, is the way that they portray buffs and debuffs and important things that are happening on your character screen. There's just like a little thing over your head I personally prefer if they have some type of visual indicator of what you're being hit by debuff wise with a timer, so you know how dangerous that effect is. So it'll lead to you being, hey, this only lasts 1 second. Do I have to use a break? Do I have to use like an immunity? Do I have to use a damage reduction skill? Or can I just let it wear off because I'm not in danger? But they really, really do need to improve debuffs and how buffs are shown to players, because it's just a little thing over your head and it doesn't tell you much, and that kind of like really determines how you're going to play the game and how you're going to react to things going on. And another thing I would also like to see is like, you know, you could just show your health bars maybe like above your head or on your health globes, just portraying like your resource information in a better way. And then ultimately for me, the way I like things in terms of like UI stuff for the way that you display information, I prefer it to be modular. I would have loved for Diablo 4 to have a fully modular UI so you can move and place elements wherever you want. I don't know if they can do that or with the possibility, but having a fully modular, fully customizable UI, making it simplistic if you want. Like you don't want to see like little like angels and stuff on the side or some of the art stuff. Some people just like minimalistic stuff. I like the minimalistic stuff, and that's how I prefer it. A game long ago, there was an ARPG called Marvel Heroes Rest in Peace. It's no longer around. I actually love the way that they did that. Minimap and overlay. So this is big. Since the dawn of time playing ARPGs, I play with my tab open to see where I'm going. Diablo 4 not having an overlaid display of your region was a big thing for me. I got used to it eventually. It does clear up the space and you can like take in the scenery a little bit more, but I like having that little overlay of like your dungeon, of your map area, and it just feels better to me. It leads to like less backtracking. It leads to me like not missing objectives and stuff like that within dungeons. So I would personally like an option to have that map overlay, and then you just have like a little slider that changes the opacity of it. But yeah, so I think they need a little option for the overlay. And then overall for the map overall, like when you press M or whatever and you open it up, it portrays stuff pretty decently. But I do think they need a way to better show like all your timed events and things like that that are going on. And this is kind of weird, but when you have like your zone objectives, right? So I guess the way Diablo 4 is going to be, it's almost like Lost Ark in a sense, where you have your adventure tome in Diablo 4. So every single time like a new season starts, I'm guessing, or whatever's going to happen in Diablo 4, you're going to have to recomplete all your zone objectives, and you have to like hover over the map and press W. There is like an option that showed all that stuff. Why don't just throw it in that option instead of pressing W's? Because it wasn't really intuitive, and some people are like, how do I find my zone objectives? How do I get my skill point? How do I get my potion? Just throw it on the other collections tab instead of like having to like hover over the map region and press W. So yeah, so have the zone objective, zone completion, zone rewards thing on the collection tab instead of just hovering over the map and pressing W. Okay, so this is a major thing for town hubs. Overall, the town hubs visually looked really, really good. However, the spacing of the NPCs in the main town hub, from an efficiency perspective, was triggering. You would have to go to the cultists on one side, jewel crafter up right above it. Then you'd have to go to your stash like through a house and a staircase, and then you'd have to go to the other vendor to sell for gold and do the blacksmith, and then you'd want to go gamble your obols, and you'd have to book it down south and go gamble. Oh, you want to craft some potions, you had to go to the middle of the city. It was just thematically it was nice, right? Because that's how towns usually are, but from an efficiency perspective, or players just wanting to not deal with that type of setup, it was frustrating. Wow. So what I really would want them to do is just add like a little NPC alley or a little NPC bazaar, and maybe they do have this already in the game. There was some town hubs though in Act 1 that were a little bit better for like layout. However, I would just name it called like the Market Bazaar or NPC Bazaar or NPC alley and just have them like in one line. Or just in a freaking circle, like just have them around me. I just stand in the circle, I just click on each one of them and just get done with everything I want to do. But yeah, I would just prefer when you're going back to town like so much after every dungeon and you're doing overworld stuff, it just became tedious constantly doing that. Just having have a place in the game where after you get done with the story and everything else like that, you can basically just interact with all the NPCs quickly. Okay, now we're gonna talk about crafting, re-rolling, kind of like imprinting, the cultists and stuff like that. So Diablo 4, they said on release, essentially is not gonna have crafting. That's a major drawback for me. My expectation of a good ARPG nowadays should have some type of endgame crafting system. You know, Diablo 2 had bases that you would get, you know, with different tiers, you know, Path of Exile, same exact thing. However, I would never want Diablo 4 crafting to be as complex as Path of Exile. Let Path of Exile be Path of Exile. However, I really did expect Diablo 4 to have some type of base crafting system, especially with all the resource gathering, right? You have resource gathering in Diablo 4. I would expect there to be some type of crafting system in Diablo 4 of some sort. It doesn't have to be super overly complex, but it would be nice to utilize resources and different materials to do crafting. You also have the cultists, right, that does like re-rolling and stuff, and that felt pretty good. And I saw a lot of comments this weekend about people talking about the different tiers of loot, where you do have like legendaries and there's legendary affixes, and these legendary affixes are pretty build defining. But what it seems to me is Diablo 4 is going a different route than Diablo 3, where Diablo 3 legendaries were like, you know, like one of your highest tier items. Diablo 4, what it seemed like they're doing with legendaries is making it into kind of like a rune slash gem system from Path of Exile or from Diablo 3, right? So they want you looking for good bases, like good rares, and then you find good imprints, right? Good legendaries, whether you get them from dungeons or when you just get them from drops. And then you basically find your good rolled rare. You're able to re-roll like one affix at the cultist, and then you're able to imprint it. And then that's what you have is like the little crafting system, re-rolling system right now. But legendaries aren't really like ultra end game in Diablo 4. That's like uniques. And then there's also different tiers of legendaries. But yeah, that's how I'm kind of looking at legendaries in Diablo 4. It's kind of just like a system to augment good rolled like legendaries, because you could change the affix on legendaries that you get, or you could just put any affix onto rares, and then it kind of just keeps like rares valuable in a sense. So I actually didn't mind that system at all, because when you're playing, you're just like kind of looking at rares, and rares still have value, and you're like, this is cool. It has some plus skill, it has some good defensive affixes, it has some good offensive affixes that synergize with my build, and I can throw a legendary power on that, and that'll be good. That's not too bad. However, the cost of re-rolling at the cultist is pretty high, so I would like to see them adjust maybe like gold re-roll costs. Your first re-roll is always cheap, and then the value increased so much so quickly. So what I found myself doing during the beta is I would re-roll like an item one time, and if it was really, really good, maybe 2 times, but I wouldn't like constantly re-roll rares over and over again. We also don't know how like gold scales in endgame yet. Now going itemization. Itemization in Diablo 4. Man, oh man. It seems to me there's some good things that they did with itemization. I like that they brought plus skills back. Some of like the positional stuff where if you're standing close or far is cool. You have your main attributes. But what I didn't like is they took a lot of like the dead attributes from secondary stats in Diablo 3 and they put them into the main affix loot pool. So there was so many times you would get like a piece of gear and it just had so many dead affixes, and you only have the ability to reroll one thing. I don't expect every piece of gear to be good, but there's so many like situational dependent affixes. It was crazy. Like reduced damage from elites from range, reduced damage from, yeah, just stuff like that. Like weird situational affixes. Either like group those affixes into a separate loot pool, or just like do a revision pass on those affixes. But there was a lot of dead affixes, and it made a lot of the item hunt like unfun. And then another thing that I actually liked with the itemization was implicit rolls. So There were some that kind of felt mandatory though on some characters, but I did enjoy the implicit rolls on stuff like that, where different item types gave you different benefits, and that led to you experimenting a little bit more with like your build and your loadout and stuff like that. And then some of the legendary affixes, there are some good legendary affixes, and it seemed like most builds were dependent on legendaries to really get ramping, like especially Barbarian, right? Like you had to have legendaries that synergize, but other classes they weren't too dependent on it. But some of the early legendary powers were like cool, and they know the way they change like your gameplay or use different skills, or there was like cause and effect type thing, which wasn't too bad. Okay, so let's go into class balance and class design. Overall, there definitely was a disparity in class balance early on, but early balance doesn't mean the most. It's all about end game balance. Rogue and Sorc were definitely the strongest characters in the beta during leveling and early on, and then Barbarian actually did get stronger later on, but Barbarian had a larger dependency on legendaries. The other thing, Barbarians did not have their mastery. Rogues had the ability to access like combo points and inner sight. Sources were able to assign a skill effect, right? And they get unlocked another skill effect at level 30. So a lot of people running Fireball for clear. They're running cooldown reset stuff. They're running a cheat death, because Orcs actually have cheat death. So it's kind of really hard to say about Barbarian because the Barbarian quest wasn't available. But early class balancing for leveling, Barbarian did not feel too good. Sorcs and Rogues felt really good. And then like each individual character, Wizard actually had a bunch of builds that were viable. You could go lightning builds, you could go like cold themes, but probably the most overpowered, strongest build was you utilizing Hydra in some form. There was also some cool tech that you could use with cooldown reduction to just reset all your skills instantly and just spam your barrier nonstop. And that kind of just led to your source of being immortal. Like, I didn't die a single time on my source. I was able to face tank every single world boss activity. In addition to that, my damage was so good, I killed my world boss, and then I was going to other people's world boss, and I was killing their world bosses for them. I killed 4 world bosses and 1 world boss spawn. Source was absolutely insane balance-wise early on in Diablo 4. So they definitely need to probably maybe do some balance like that, or maybe later on it equalizes out. Rogue too. Rogue felt really good. I played a lot on Rogue. You have your different generators that were good. There were a couple of viable ones. You had your spenders. People were playing Twisted Blade. They're playing Flurry. They're playing Rapid Shot. They're playing Barrage. I experimented with all of them. They all felt good in certain aspects. You could use different imbuements, shadow imbuement for clear. There was like some cool tech with poison imbuements and like traps that you could reset. And then there's also this bug with dodge rings where if you applied a poison to mobs, you would just basically become immortal, but they need to fix that. That was just like a little bug. They need to like do a class balance overhaul, or just like look at the numbers and adjust them for the early level experience, make Barbarians feel a little better, and they'll probably bring down the power level of some other classes. No one likes getting nerfed, but some skills were pretty much way too strong. And my biggest gripe with a lot of the classes is that you had to assign your ultimate to a keybind, so I would just really like that into a separate spot. I just want a separate key for your ultimate that you always have that doesn't eat 6 of your other selections, and that would just widen and broaden your build diversity overall, because it just felt mandatory using your ultimate. Another thing is Diablo 4. Not your typical ARPG, right? It's kind of more of a MMO influence, so you have a bunch of like world activities and stuff. Overall, the world activities that we experienced in the beta was kind of all right. I personally came up with a little route utilizing waypoints, going to places where I knew I could farm obols. There were different world events at strongholds. Clearing strongholds were fun. You had all your dungeons and stuff. The world boss itself was cool, but we'll talk about that in a second. But the overworld activities were fun. One of my biggest gripes, though, is they want you to navigate the open world and like take in scenery, and you'll probably be on your mountain and end game, so they don't want like density too high. And I kind of agree that you just don't want to be going through swarms of enemy in the overworld nonstop. But there was places in the overworld where it was barren. You would just go there and there was no enemies and the world felt empty. So they need to look at mob placements, especially in Act 1, because that's what we had access to, on where they have mobs. Yeah, there is some place you're like, this is just a desolate wasteland. At least throw a couple mobs here. Throw like a chest here. Throw like a shrine here. Throw like an event here. But it just felt like it was like an incomplete world. Some areas felt really good in the certain regions, like in the North region, by one of the strongholds, that felt really good. There were the couple world event spawns there that you could constantly interact with by the waypoint. There are some dungeons, like same thing in the southeast, but then mostly it was the east side of the map that had this issue. There's a barren wasteland when you're navigating through the area. So throw in some more mobs. I don't want like insane like dungeon type density, but I do want to see more mobs. Let's talk about dungeons. Dungeon. There was, what, 22 dungeon in the beta. 23 technically, but there's 22 of them. Dungeons had different themes, they had different objectives, right? My main criticism of dungeons, some of them were fun, some of them were not too fun, but the biggest problem with dungeons for me is a lot of dungeons did not have density. There's a lot of backtracking. I was expecting more variety of layouts, and then the objectives became really repetitive also early on. In the first act, I just felt like I was constantly freeing prisoners and grabbing some object and putting it on a pressure plate. And after running a lot of dungeons to farm this beta, and I'm guessing, you know, that's kind of what they hinted at what endgame is going to be later on, the dungeon activities felt repetitive. I think the dungeons are a good base, but they need to look at the layouts of them. They need to look at the mob density. They need to look at elites maybe. Some of the bosses were really undertuned, and they were kind of like free loot pinatas. And then other ones, there was actually none of the bosses were really too complex. But yeah, dungeons as a whole, I would like to see improved. In addition to that, a lot of people didn't know this, but you could just like teleport out of dungeons. So I think they should have like some type of tips thing too, that kind of like explained basic systems. So dungeons, you just ended up walking through a lot of vacant areas, backtracking, and not spending time killing monsters. That's what ARPGs are about, right? ARPGs are about going toe-to-toe with monsters, having interactive combat, killing things, and getting some sweet loot. And that's what matters the most. And then this ties into like mobs just throughout it, right? We already talked about a mob density AI, but some of the AI on the mobs, they kind of just like wandered around in confusion. I don't know what it was. I wasn't using any CC skills or anything else like that, but they need to look at some of the mob AI and maybe like make them more aggressive, make them not as make them not as passive, make them more engaging, make them not get like stuck on walls. There's weird interactions with Waller too, different affixes, and some of the mobs, the AI just wasn't there. Now, overall performance in the beta, my performance was pretty good on my computer. There was a memory leak, so hopefully they get that fixed, especially if you played on high textures. But overall, I don't have the best computer. You know, I have the 3080. It's not the oldest system. It's like a couple years old. Overall, the performance was pretty decent. And I didn't really have too many hiccups. I did have like some crashes. There's some issues like with DX12. There was like some stuttering and stuff like that. But hopefully they will like work with NVIDIA or in-house stuff and they polish up the overall game performance and fix those memory leaks, fix some of the FPS drops. Especially when there's like server sharding and everything else. Another thing that I'm a little worried about is the price of the game is definitely high. It's a modern price game, and it has modern monetization, meaning you just don't even buy the base game. They're gonna have a shop. They're gonna have battle passes that they reassured us won't have any pay to win. We'll only have cosmetic stuff, and they said on the freemium tier everyone will get experience boosts. but the price point of Diablo 4 is extremely high, and it's not affordable for everybody. Expect to pay a lot, right? You're not getting a good deal on the game. You're spending a lot of money on it. And then my other worry is, right, they already said they're gonna do beefy seasons, which I'm actually happy about the beefy seasons. However, that probably just means more monetization, right? Every single time a season comes out, there's gonna be more and more monetization, so you'll end up spending a decent amount of money on the game. Gamers are still one of the most valuable forms of entertainment because of how much you could replay them and how much hours you get. Yeah, you still, like a cost to hour ratio, it's pretty good, right? Like, what other form of entertainment can you spend $60-70 and get 2,000 hours of it? You can't, right? Nowadays, if you're going on a movie date, right, and you're getting a soda pop, you're getting a little popcorn, maybe you're getting some candy, you're basically spending that in 2 hours, and that superhero film that you just watched might have been utter shit, right? So yeah, your price to time inputted ratio is really, really good in terms of entertainment for just video games. Now, there was one major bug. Well, there's a lot of bugs that we encountered this Diablo 4 weekend, and honestly, I'm a little worried. Yeah, I'm a little worried about all the bugs we encountered because they're definitely on crunch time, whether it was related to some performance stuff, some visual stuff. But one of the biggest things that I encountered that could influence a lot of your gameplay loop was the way they did server sharding. So if you're not familiar with this, one of the best ways to farm loot and characters during this beta was essentially going to some spawn, going to the world boss, going to like some event in the open world, killing the boss, teleporting back to town. And then when he came back and he teleported, it would a lot of times put you in a different server instance shard via the way the overworld worked. So you were pretty much just going back to town, back and forth, just farming the same thing over and over again, getting a bunch of loot. I did this for the world boss. I killed the world boss 4 times in one spawn. And then people would do it for the level 35 mobs in different events. It's almost like Diablo 2, I guess, like leaving a game and creating a new game and farming something, but I don't think this was the gameplay loop that people, or that Diablo was intending. So I wonder if they're gonna fix something. Or yeah, are they gonna fix this, or are they gonna leave it in the game? Because that was, yeah, it was the best way to farm obols, and you could just abuse world bosses and get more loot that way. So I don't know if they're gonna make world bosses like a weekly timer or what. So yeah, they need to look into like the whole server sharding stuff. Yeah, that will 100% be abused and taken advantage of and min-maxed to the T, like teleporting on your friends, joining different areas, and just getting an unintended amount of loot. And last off, the one world boss that we fought, honestly, it was a cool world boss, right? It had good telegraphs on its abilities. The perspective took a little while to get used to because like major characters so zoomed out, but there was actually a feature like within the options where you could highlight your character, and that made it a little better. So if you like lost your character while doing the world boss, you could just like go and highlight it, and it would show you where it's at. It was somewhat challenging, right? A lot of people got killed by this world boss. A lot of people were unable to kill the world boss, and this led to another issue. They need to put some type of restrictions into the world bosses. Since world bosses, they were saying there's only 8 to 12 people per server shard that could fight them. What ended up happening is you just had a bunch of low levels come to that fight, and there was only a couple high level people, or people that were on item level. And since all these low levels were there, basically just looking to get carried or to see the boss, people were unable to kill it because they weren't the intended level for that activity. So they need to do some type of restriction to not have that happen, because a lot of people felt like they wasted their time and they were extremely disappointed with world bosses. So they either need to put some restrictions in the area, increase the timer, like do some type of scaling stuff where the low levels can like contribute more damage. But overall, yeah, the difficulty of this world boss on item level, it felt pretty all right for like a world boss. If you just face tanked everything, you died. If you looked at the boss's mechanics and at the animations, you pretty much knew what to do, right? You just stood in melee range. When it did a double slam into the ground, you knew it was going to pull it back, so you just stepped off to the side, and you pretty much wouldn't die or take any damage if you knew those two things. Don't stand in front. Watch the circular animation like on his region. Just stay on his butt attacking and then watch for the slash. Yeah, world boss, overall it was a cool experience and it gave decent loot too. But all in all, that's basically what I thought about this beta. If I had to give it a rating right now, I would probably give Diablo 4 probably like a 7.5 or 8 out of 10. Overall, it was a fun game to play. I just kept on waking up every morning and I was jumping in. I was like wanting to experiment. I was wanting to try different characters and it was actually fun. But there is a lot of things that need work. I'm worried about the end game loot. I'm worried about endgame as a whole because they haven't shown it to us. Everyone knows about Diablo 3 beta. Diablo 3 beta, I played it. You got up the Skeleton King. It actually looked really cool. It looked really fun. Everyone was excited for it. And then Diablo 3 came out and it was a buggy mess. Everything was not balanced. There were like weird affixes, like invulnerability mobs that were super, super quick and you were just running for your life. There was like terrible places to farm. You were just doing chest farming and like killing uniques. There were like no drop rates on like legendaries and stuff. But I'm actually not worried about that for Diablo 4 because I don't know if they had legendary drop rates increased for the beta, but you were getting a lot of legendaries. But that's because I think legendaries aren't supposed to be like Diablo 3 legendaries. They're just supposed to be like a gem or a rune for your rare gear to augment them and make your build customize your build for your talents that you're currently using. Good experience with it. I think the base of Diablo 4 is there. Like the main things that are important, your graphics, your cinematics, your sound, the UI needs changes, your endgame loop. I'm worried about itemization, but overall I had a really, really fun time playing Diablo 4. I think it just needs a lot of polish. Now the question is, do they have enough time to polish Diablo 4 before it comes out? Because what I'm really, really worried about is you have this beautiful looking game, you have this combat that feels nice and smooth, but then you get to end game and there's no grind, there's no crafting, the loot shallow, build customization shallow. And that's my main concern. I'm not worried about the story or the lore, the graphics, or the aesthetic and ambiance of the game. I'm worried about the guts of the ARPG and the only thing that matters, which is your end game and your replayability. I'm excited for Diablo 4, but also worried. Actually, I think I forgot to say this in my review, but the Diablo 4 skill tree, it is fairly straightforward. It's fairly simplistic. It's extremely forgiving because it allows you to respec constantly and experiment. But we didn't see what was endgame, so we're missing a bunch of skill points acquired from leveling. And then the big outlier, the big unknown, is what the Paragon board does for your customization, and then also what endgame gear and itemization does. Diablo 4, they're not looking for insane customization, creativity. They want it to be like one of those things that you could just jump into, you could click stuff, you could kill stuff, and you could have fun. They don't want you like spending more time calculating things on an Excel sheet than actually just playing the game and picking stuff. So they want a low barrier of entry. And then as you progress through, I'm hoping there is more customization stuff. There is more investment stuff. There is more itemization related stuff. There is more creativity stuff, but they want it to be a very, very low entry point where it's in everyone's game. And then hopefully later on that difficulty progresses a little bit. So yeah, it's fairly straightforward and it's a very, very forgiving system allowing you to experiment early on. They don't want it to be Path of Exile. They don't want it to be Path of Exile. That's basically a nutshell. They don't want it to be convoluted. They don't want you like wanting to like try to figure out or be like overly guide dependent. They just want you getting there, having fun, making mistakes and experimenting.
This is a 56-second cooldown, 23, 23, 13.
Oh! I got rice in my eyes somehow.